The noon light washed over Arcanus Prime's capital, turning the glass and steel towers into spears of white fire. Beneath their shadow moved Kayla Vey, her skin the deep cobalt of her alien heritage, yet her face unmistakably human. She carried herself like a soldier, but her eyes held the cold weight of someone who had never truly belonged to either world. Among humans, she was too strange. Among the Tavari, she was too plain. Her black hair was braided tight against the wind, a Terran blade strapped to her hip, and a plasma-forged Tavari dagger across her back. In the human tongue, her name meant nothing. In the Tavari dialect, it meant trouble. She intended to make sure both definitions fit. The open-air market was a wall of noise, haggling voices, skimmer engines, and the clang of metal crates. Vendors barked in mixed languages, selling everything from alien spices to salvaged Earth technology. Kayla moved through them with purpose, ignoring the curious glances that followed her. A child stared openly at her strange blend of features before being pulled away by a wary parent. She paused at a stall stacked with dented helmets, her fingers brushing one bearing the faded emblem of Earth's fallen fleet. Her jaw tightened. Once, those emblems had meant safety. Now, they were just relics sold for scrap. She turned away, her mind already on the real reason she had come. Ahead, 3 armored sentinels stepped into her path. Their silver plating reflected. The midday sun, each carrying a lance tipped with a humming energy blade. The lead soldier's voice rang out over the crowd. "Identify yourself." Kayla stopped 3 paces away, studying the gaps in their armor. "Kayla Vey," she said, evenly. "I have business with the Guildmaster." The second sentinel snorted. "The Guildmaster has no business with half-bloods." The insult rolled off her like water. She had heard worse from both sides of her lineage. "Then tell him I'm here to change his mind," she said. "Or tell him I'm here to end it." The first sentinel's stance shifted, a telltale sign of someone about to make a point with their weapon. He lunged, but Kayla's Terran blade was already in motion. Steel met energy, and the hum of the blade turned to a hiss as it cut through his wrist joint. The second came in fast, but she dropped low, sweeping his legs before burying her dagger into the seam under his chest plate. The third hesitated, and hesitation was fatal. She pivoted, slammed her shoulder into him, and sent, his weapon spinning into the dust. When he tried to rise, her boot was already on his throat. The crowd fell silent as the sentinels lay broken in the street. Kayla wiped her blade on the fallen soldier's cloak and kept walking. Behind her, murmurs rippled through the marketplace. No one interfered. No one dared. As she crossed the final stretch toward the guild's citadel, she could feel the eyes above. Watchers on balconies, drones hovering in the glare of the sun. They would be reporting her arrival, probably embellishing it with every step. She didn't care. Let them make her sound dangerous. Let them make her sound unstoppable. Because today, she intended to be both. The citadel's gates loomed high, carved from blackstone and inlaid with alien runes that shimmered faintly in the daylight. 2 massive doors groaned open, revealing a hall lined with towering columns. Sunlight streamed in through skylights, painting long beams across the polished floor. At the far end sat the Guildmaster, pale-skinned, golden-eyed, draped in white, and gold robes that glittered faintly in the light. Around him stood 6 guards in ceremonial armor, their weapons held at rest but ready. "Half-blood," the Guildmaster said, his tone a lazy drawl. "What makes you think you can walk into my hall?" Kayla stepped forward, planting her Terran blade into the stone floor with a metallic ring. "Because I carry a message from both my worlds," she said. The Guildmaster's lip curled. "And what do your worlds say?" She met his gaze without blinking. "They say your time is over." The hall went quiet for a beat, then the guards chuckled darkly. Kayla didn't so much as twitch. The Guildmaster leaned forward slightly, like a predator scenting prey. I could have you killed before you take another breath. She tilted her head. You could. But you won't. Before he could answer, she continued. Your enemies are closing in. They've already seized 3 of your outposts, and they're moving on your supply lines. You need someone who can slip behind their lines, take out their leaders, and break their momentum. You need me. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried in the sunlit chamber like a blade sliding free of its sheath. The guards shifted uneasily. No one spoke to the guildmaster like this. He studied her for a long moment, then said, And why would you help me? Kayla's mouth curved into something between a smile and a challenge. Because I'm not helping you. I'm taking the fight to them for my own reasons, but your enemies are my enemies right now, so you can either work with me or stand in my way. And if you stand in my way, I'll treat you like I treat them. She took one more step forward. Your choice. For a moment, the only sound in the hall was the faint hum of the runes in the walls. Then the guildmaster gestured and a datapad was brought forward. You'll have coordinates and a ship, he said at last. Fail, and your blood will stain these floors. Kayla turned to leave without bowing, sunlight catching the edge of her blade as she slid it back into its sheath. Outside, the streets bustled with midday trade, but her mind was already beyond Arcanis Prime. She needed allies, ones with no loyalty to the guild, no love for the Tavari elite. The outlaw fleets, the scattered human warbands in the dead zones, those were her kind of people. She would find them, forge them into something sharper than any blade. And when the time came, she would cut a path through the galaxy so both her worlds understood the truth. Kayla Vey had come, and she had no mercy. The midday sun glared off the steel plates of the warship Ironwake as it hovered above the dusty plains outside Arcanis Prime. Kayla stood at the base of the loading ramp, wind tugging at her braid, scanning the crew she had gathered. They were a mix of humans in scavenged armor and alien mercenaries who owed her favors, or feared her enough to pretend they did. Joran, a Terran demolitions expert, leaned against a crate with a lazy grin. Beside him stood Riley, a lithe Tavari, sharpshooter with skin like polished stone. They didn't like each other much, but Kayla didn't need them to like each other. She needed them to win. Once aboard, Kayla strode to the command deck, sunlight streaming through the angular windows as the ship lifted into the sky. Her datapad displayed the first target, a heavily fortified fuel depot feeding the guild master's enemies. The depot's shields were strong, but they had one flaw: reliance on a single cooling conduit buried in the east side. Take that out, and the whole thing would cook itself into slag. Joran, you're on explosives, she said. Riley, keep him covered. No stray fire. Riley gave the barest nod. Joran winked, already checking the charge timers. Kayla's orders came fast, clear, and without argument. By midday, the Ironwake descended into the pale dust fields near the target. The depot rose ahead like a squat fortress, its shield dome rippling faintly in the bright sun. Patrol drones circled lazily above, but Kayla knew better than to think they were harmless. She led the team low, using ridges of rock for cover, every step measured. Heat radiated off the ground, but she barely noticed. The only thing she felt was the slow, deliberate beat of her mission unfolding. Close enough to see the glint of the cooling conduit's casing, she signaled a halt. Joran, plant it, she whispered. As Joran crouched over the conduit, Kayla scanned the open field beyond. A glint caught her eye. Rifle scopes. Contact! She snapped, just as the first shot rang out. The team dove for cover, energy bolts kicking up clouds of dirt. Rayleigh rolled into position, her rifle spitting silent death across the gap. Each shot found its mark with cold precision. Kayla moved with lethal calm, picking off flankers while keeping Joran shielded. 3 seconds, Joran yelled over the comms, slamming the last charge into place. Kayla counted down with him, then shouted, "Move!" They were halfway to the ridge when the explosion lit the depot like a second sun. The shield dome wavered, flickered, and died. A chain of secondary blasts ripped through the fuel reserves, sending fire and smoke curling into the blue sky. Kayla didn't watch it burn. She was already moving them toward the extraction point. Back aboard the Iron Wake, the crew was buzzing with adrenaline, but Kayla just keyed in the next set of coordinates. 1 target down. Many more to go. She knew the Guildmaster's enemies would now know her name, and that was exactly the point. Fear was a weapon, and she intended to sharpen it. The Iron Wake cut across open skies, its hull gleaming under the hard light of midday. The next target was a supply convoy moving through the Draven Flats, escorted by 6 gunships. Taking them head-on was suicide. Kayla had no intention of doing that. Instead, she planned to lure them into a canyon where their formation would break apart, leaving them exposed. As they prepared, Joran muttered something about classic Kayla, but she ignored him. This wasn't about being clever. It was about sending a message that every route, every asset, and every ally of her enemies was vulnerable. The canyon's entrance was narrow, flanked by sheer cliffs that glowed pale gold in the sun. Kayla's crew waited on the high ledges hidden under camo netting. The plan was simple: disable the lead and tail vehicles, box them in, and pick them apart. When the convoy appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind like a comet's tail, Kayla gave a silent hand signal. Moments later, 2 detonations shook the ground. The lead gunship dropped like a stone, and the rear transport's treads shattered. The rest of the convoy screeched to a halt, confusion breaking their formation. Kayla was already moving, vaulting down the rocky slope with her blade drawn. Her team followed, guns blazing in precise bursts. The defenders scrambled to respond, but the bright daylight worked against them. Kayla's people had perfect visibility, every shadow sharp, every target clear. She cut through the nearest soldier with a single stroke, pivoted, and took the arm off another before they even raised their rifle. Joran's explosives turned one of the gunships into a plume of fire, while Rayleigh's shots pinned down anyone trying to regroup. In under 6 minutes, the canyon floor was theirs. The crew stripped the convoy of weapons, rations, and intel, moving fast before reinforcements could arrive. Kayla found a data core in the command vehicle, encrypted, but likely containing shipment routes. She tucked it into her pack, already thinking 2 moves ahead. As they pulled out, she glanced back at the canyon. The wreckage lay under the blazing sun, smoke curling upward like a signal flare. She wanted the enemy to see it. She wanted them to understand that Kayla Vey was not simply disrupting them. She was dismantling them. Back aboard the Iron Wake, Kayla uploaded the data core to the ship's AI. Streams of information filled the display: timelines, coordinates, and even the location of a high-ranking enemy commander. She didn't smile, but there was a shift in her expression, a subtle narrowing of her eyes. This wasn't just a step forward. It was a door opening, one she intended to kick down. By midday, 2 days later, the Iron Wake approached a sprawling port city where the commander's yacht was docked. It was a glittering sprawl of glass and steel towers along the coastline, with the sun throwing sharp reflections off every surface. Kayla moved through the bustling streets in a plain cloak, blending into the crowd while her crew circled too. Secure escape routes. The plan was surgical. Get in, eliminate the commander, get out before his guards could close the net. She found him at an open-air dining terrace, shaded by an ornate canopy. The man was all polished arrogance, sipping chilled wine as his guards lounged nearby. Kayla didn't rush. She walked straight to his table, letting him notice her. His brow furrowed, confusion giving way to recognition. "Kayla Vey," he said slowly. "I heard you'd be dead by now." She tilted her head slightly. "You heard wrong." Before the guards could rise, she swept her blade across the table, the strike so precise it barely disturbed the wine glass before ending his life. Chaos erupted instantly, but Kayla was already gone, vanishing into the bright streets as shouts and alarms rose behind her. By the time her crew reached the rendezvous point, the whole port was on lockdown. The Iron Wake lifted off with minutes to spare, its engines roaring in the midday heat. From the command deck, Kayla watched the port. Shrink into the distance, one more name crossed off the list. One more step toward breaking the spine of her enemies. Her crew exchanged glances, the weight of their growing reputation settling over them. They were no longer just a nuisance. They were the knife at the enemy's throat. And Kayla, standing, in the sunlight streaming across the deck, knew exactly where she would strike next. The Iron Wake flew low over rolling grasslands, the sunlight turning the waves of green into gold. Kayla stood on the deck's edge, her gaze fixed on the valley ahead, a guild weapons foundry, shielded by layered defenses and crawling with armed patrols. This wasn't a strike she could make quietly. She wanted it loud, messy, and unforgettable. The foundry supplied the guild's main war effort. Destroying it in broad daylight would gut their supply chain and send their morale into freefall. "We're going in heavy," she told her crew. No one questioned it. Joran armed the dropships, Riley calibrated the long-range rifles, and the rest of the team loaded up with ammunition. The Iron Wake descended into range, bright sun reflecting off its hull, making it impossible to miss. Guild sirens wailed as Kayla's dropships hit the ground and her forces poured forward. Pulse fire cracked across the open plain, but Kayla didn't slow. She surged ahead, blade in one hand, sidearm in the other, cutting down the first line of defenders before they could regroup. The fight turned brutal fast. The foundry's courtyard became a storm of smoke, gunfire, and shouting. Joran's explosives tore through the outer defenses, while Rayleigh picked off the guild's officers one by one from a high scaffold. Kayla pressed straight toward the heart of the complex, knowing the shield generator was buried in the central tower. She kicked through the steel doors, dropped the first guard inside, and carved her way up the stairwell. The sunlight blazed through broken windows as she reached the control room and fired a single shot into the generator's core. The entire shield collapsed in a shimmering wave. Outside, the blast was the signal her crew had been waiting for. Artillery fire from the Iron Wake rained down, smashing the now exposed structures. Kayla emerged from the tower just as the final charges detonated, reducing the foundry to twisted metal and fire. The midday sky was filled with black smoke, but her people were already pulling back. They didn't linger. The guild had just taken a daylight beating in front of every set of eyes in the valley. Back aboard the Iron Wake, Kayla marked another red slash through her map of targets. "We've crossed a line," Rayleigh said quietly, watching the foundry burn on the ship's cameras. Kayla didn't look away. "Good," she replied. "Let them know the day belongs to us." By the next morning, the guild had scrambled fleets, tightening control on every route in the sector. Kayla used that overreach against them. She planted false intel on a shipment of high-grade plasma cores, supposedly bound for their forward base. In reality, she'd baited them into sending their best strike force into an empty desert while she hit their main data relay. This relay was no ordinary tower. It linked guild forces across entire star systems. In daylight, it glistened like a blade of glass against the blue sky. The Iron Wake dropped Kayla and her strike team just beyond the tower's perimeter. The enemy expected attacks at night, in shadows. They weren't ready for Kayla to walk, straight up the hill at noon. Turrets swiveled toward her, but her people moved like a machine. Rayleigh's first shot destroyed the nearest gun nest, and Joran's EMP charges fried the rest. Kayla reached the tower's base with only minutes, to spare before reinforcements could land. Inside, the relay was a labyrinth of glowing consoles and humming power conduits. Kayla planted a timed charge at the main hub, then downloaded every scrap of guild data she could carry. She wanted them to feel the double sting, losing their communications and knowing she now held their secrets. The bright sun streamed through, the shattered panels above as she sprinted back to the dropship. From high above, the Iron Wake's crew watched the explosion ripple through the relay, fragments glittering in the daylight before tumbling to the earth. Entire guild fleets would be deaf and blind for days. Kayla stood on the deck, the warm wind in her hair, already planning her next strike. She wasn't just dismantling their war machine. She was erasing their control, piece by piece. The guildmaster himself finally reacted, calling for Kayla's head and putting the largest bounty in guild history on her. Mercenaries flooded the system, hunting her from asteroid ports to trade hubs. Instead of hiding, Kayla made herself even more visible, hitting a guild military parade in the city of Varen, a bold insult under the bright sun. The parade route ran through the wide central plaza, lined with banners and cheering citizens. At the stroke of midday, the Iron Wake's shadow fell over it. Kayla's team came in hard, dropping onto the plaza in formation. The stunned guild officers barely had time to draw weapons before Kayla cut through them, scattering the honor guard. Joran's smoke charges turned the celebration into chaos, while Riley picked off snipers hidden on the rooftops. Kayla drove straight toward the reviewing stand where the parade's marshal stood frozen. She struck him down in front of the crowd, making sure every camera drone caught it. The daylight spectacle sent shock waves across the sector. Some civilians cheered, others hid, but all of them saw that the guild was vulnerable in the most public way possible. By the time Kayla's dropships lifted away, the plaza was a churn of smoke, dust, and scattered banners. The guild's propaganda machine would work overtime to spin the event, but Kayla knew the truth had already taken root. That night, though Kayla barely noticed night anymore, her crew gathered in the Iron Wake's mess. "They'll come for us harder now," Joran warned. Kayla just nodded. "Then we'll make them pay for every step." The final strike came 3 days later. The guildmaster's personal fortress, a sprawling citadel of steel and stone, sat in the middle of an open plain under the unbroken glare of the sun. No shadows, no cover, no way in without being seen. Kayla didn't care. She wanted them to see her coming. Every ship, every fighter, every soldier loyal to her cause joined the Iron Wake in a daylight assault that shook the ground for miles. Guild defenses opened fire the moment the fleet appeared, but Kayla's formation pressed forward. Dropships slammed into the courtyard while artillery hammered the outer walls. Kayla herself led the breach, cutting down the first wave of defenders with ruthless precision. Inside, the halls echoed with the clash of steel and the roar of gunfire. She fought her way to the throne room where the guildmaster waited, armed and armored, flanked by his best warriors. The fight was vicious and short. Kayla's blade shattered his guard's defense before driving through the guildmaster's chest. As he fell, sunlight poured through the high windows, casting Kayla in a blaze of gold. She planted her boot on the fallen ruler's chest and looked out over the room. "This world is mine now," she said, her voice carrying through the open, comms for every survivor to hear. By midday, the Citadel's banners were torn down and replaced with the crest of her people. The guild was shattered, its chains broken, its fleets scattered. Kayla Vey had taken 2 worlds and bound them under her command, not as a tyrant but as a shield and a sword, and under the bright, relentless sun she stood unchallenged.